music you're listening to there is the dulcet tones of Michael McKibben and his band. I've got Michael McKibben on the phone here. Michael McKibben is an amazing person in his own right. He's got so many different stories to tell, but one of them is about being a missionary and being a gospel music missionary, if I'm getting that right. And we're listening to some of the music that they were playing. I think it was back in the 80s, if I'm not mistaken. I think this was probably circa 1980, the music that we're hearing now. I'm not able to let Michael hear this, so I can't really refer back, but I'm listening to it through the magic of YouTube. The magic of YouTube, which is a nice segue into the interview that we're actually going to be doing with Michael McKibben, who many say is he's the Thomas Edison of our era. And so I'm going to bring the music down and introduce Michael. I've got him on the phone here. Hi, Michael.
Hi, Jenny. How are you?
I am so well today. I'm really excited to talk to you today, and I'm really excited to introduce you to the audience because you have such an amazing array of stories to tell, but the most important one is the one that we're going to be focusing on today, which has to do with a very timely subject because we're taking a look now at some of the repercussions of the Facebook theft, and Mark Zuckerberg right now is testifying before Congress, as I understand it, although I haven't been following that. But we're going to reel back time a little bit to a time prior to the internet, which is hard for some people to even fathom because we've had it, it's so much part of our life. And in fact, we're doing this interview via the magic of the internet. And although I do have you on the phone, which is kind of interesting. We've got a mixture of technologies here. Now, tell me a little bit about your background, first of all, as a gospel musician, and then we'll move into your actual, the other side of things, the work that you were doing after that time.
Okay. I graduated from Ohio State in civil engineering in 1973, and I was also a musician. I was in the Ohio State marching band for 4 years, and decided that Nancy and I got married to Nancy, and we decided to go on the road with a gospel music group that traveled all over the world. The group we were in was in 27 different countries. We traveled for 3 years, and then I became the European director and moved to the UK, where we really focused on ministry to the Iron Curtain, which included Poland, Hungary, Yugoslavia, Romania, and then the Soviet Union. So that's what I did before, right out of college, and did that for almost a decade. And during that time, we had some very unique experiences, especially in Eastern Europe, where we worked with the Roman Catholic Church in Poland and became good friends with Cardinal Karol Wojtyła, who ended up becoming Pope in 1980, had us at an audience in Rome where we sang our music out through the Vatican PA system. And that was the day before Lech Wałęsa climbed the gate in Gdansk, Poland, and started Solidarity. We then actually toured, sponsored by Solidarity, in the first year they were free. And then we decided to try to take this work into the Soviet Union. And to cut a long story short, and many miracles, we ended up getting a invitation to record music by the woman who became the official composer for the 1980 Moscow Summer Olympics. And we ended up getting two of those songs on the official Olympic film. And if you'll recall, that's when Jimmy Carter was boycotting the Olympics over Afghanistan. So it was a very tense time, and we worked with many amazing people in the Soviet Union, and a number of those people ended up serving prison terms pretty directly from working with us. So we also had a firsthand view of what tyranny does to a culture and how a few brave souls can make a big difference in what happens in that society. And so then I came back here and decided to become a management consultant. So obviously that's a logical next step. And did that for a number of years. And then as the internet was beginning and PCs were becoming commercial, I had some ideas for developing software. So I did a number of software projects and then landed the contract to rebuild AT&T's email system in the early 90s. And this was, when you mentioned pre-internet, the internet was around, but it was all Department of Defense. And it was, if you recall, the early 90s when the internet started to become commercial. Well, as it turned out, as I was rebuilding AT&T's email system, internet started, AT&T offered AT&T WorldNet, and I was one of the first 10 websites, commercial websites that they put up, along with Disney and others. And I supported all of their internal operation with this messaging and also all their key clients with electronic messaging, just as the internet was hitting, and then saw some real opportunities to use the internet to improve the way collaboration occurs. And that's when I started my current company, Leader Technologies, in 97. And we set out on a task to determine the best way to use the emerging internet to help people better collaborate. I think I'll stop there and see if you have any questions so far.
Oh gosh, I have so many questions. There's so much in the way of questions, but I'm just trying to lay a nice foundation for those that may not have a real understanding of what was happening in terms of the internet generally and the way that things were working. Because I remember in the 80s, you know, I was involved in the dark world of DOS, as they say, and so you know, pre-Windows, we were having to. Not that I was a programmer, but really, if you wanted to use a computer in the 80s, you were really having to work with DOS and some, you know, of course I had an Apple IIe in 1983, but still it was DOS based. So there was a huge paradigm shift, I guess, if you want to put it that way, between the 80s and the 90s. If you take a look at even how computers themselves worked and what, you know, the innovations that were taking place, generally speaking, let alone the connectivity issue. But I'm really interested in that part because I was really trying to work at a distance, you know, work at home when I was having my babies and run a business in the downtown area, and I lived outside of town. So I was using a 300 baud modem. Now, this is not about me, but I just want to sort of orient people as to what was happening. And it was magical, the idea that you could move any kind of a file from one computer to another virtually, if you want to put it that way, over a phone line. So I'm sure that you were very familiar with that technology, but I think that it's really interesting to understand in my own mind how things just moved ahead so exponentially. And there you were, kind of minding your own business, literally, as the founder of Leader Technologies. And as I'm thinking, when did you actually start that business?
Started Leader in 97, but if going back to the 80s, I was one of the first owners of an Apple II in England, but we actually used it in our ministry work. So, yeah, I go back to the same time frame when these computers were fascinating. They weren't too connected. And so, yeah, we've both seen it from the beginnings of networked computers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting, because I remember this idea of, it was called Big Blue and Cousins, and you could actually talk to each other in this kind of very rudimentary way, I guess, in a chat room. Now, what was the difficulty? What was the obstacle to networking and getting people working in real time when you began your work? When
I started doing software development, the real challenge is interface design was one area. There's kind of three layers to building a piece of software. You've got the interface layer, and that's what the user sees, and then you've got the middle layer, which is like the engine. That's what takes the data you put on the screen and manipulates it. And then thirdly is the network layer, where you can communicate it to other people and they can communicate with you. So in the early days, the third layer, the network layer, was pretty non-existent. And so as the internet started developing and we started becoming aware of what it could do, another thing happened at the interface layer, and that was the browser. The internet browser became this universal front end that people could write programs to without having to kind of build it from scratch. So I saw the opportunity to develop special browser software for the interface side and tie it all to the internet. So that became the beginnings of what we worked on. And after I formed Leader in 97, I put together a team of developers. And I said, look, there's an opportunity here to use the browser and the internet to collaborate in a new way. And to cut a long story short, by 1999, we had the magic aha moment and realized that we had invented something very special. And what everyone knows it now to be is social networking.
So fascinating.
At the time, we didn't use those terms.
Right. So it was basically just the idea that multiple people could be using the same platform at the same time. Do I have that right in the most elementary form, or correct me if I'm wrong about that? Just the idea that people could communicate in real time. So that was the magic moment, I guess, for you, is to realize that you had come up with something that was able to fulfill that requirement. Is that a synopsis?
Yeah, at a real high level, yes.
Okay, so because we take it for granted so much now, the idea that we can have these, multiple people on any platform. I mean, we're talking about all platforms, and you were talking about how really the apps in our phones, everything rely on this technology. It all has its basis in this. So we're not talking about social networking per se. We're talking about the, it's not even the engine. It's like the entire platform upon which that's built.
That's right.
And so
yes, we didn't assume there weren't other people working on something similar at the time. So we were just trying to commercialize what we had invented. But as that next decade developed in the 2000s, we began to realize that we were unique, and that what happened after that is a horrible story of property theft by the federal government. So, who then turned around and gave it to all these technology companies. So that's why you see our technology is so ubiquitous now on phones and on the internet, is because they basically distributed our code to everyone.
Right. So that's the sort of the leap forward, I suppose, in terms of what you understand now to be the situation. But you were just a person that was kind of minding your own business, developing a patent and doing your music. And I'm sort of setting the scene there because on Character Driven, I do have a lot of people who tend to be kind of minding their own business, for lack of a better word, and doing the right thing in their life. And I think for the average person, they have a hard time understanding that your life can really change, sometimes at a moment's notice, but maybe over time you begin to have this revelation that the world is not as you thought it was. And I think particularly for Christians, this is a very difficult thing. I know that talking to people in a church setting, for instance, they're very much to their credit, they're often very in favor of the government, and they want to be supportive, and they want to set a good example of good citizenship and that sort of thing. And they have a very difficult time, even more so, I think, than some of the folks that are exposed a little bit more to the realities of the world. So I think that might categorize how you were. There you were with your family and raising your kids and homeschooling and doing all these wonderful things. And in your work life, you were having the veil lifted, I guess, in a certain way. So tell me about that point where all of that started to become noticeable, or where you became aware of it. Was it sudden, or was it a slow understanding? You started to see your technology being, well, first of all, tell me about the patent, because I want people to have a firm understanding of the fact that you did apply for and receive a patent for this technology.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So after we had the aha moment in 1999, the internet probably had less than 10 million users, so it wasn't commercial. We couldn't make any money off of it yet. So what we decided to do was protect our intellectual property by filing patents. And so that's what we started working on almost immediately after having the magic moment, when we realized we had something quite unique. But that was during my business phase. And if I go back to answer your question about the ministry phase, I wasn't naive to the world. We had worked in the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, and we had seen a lot of abuse by governments over their people. So that wasn't something that was a surprise to me. But what I was surprised by is that America was heading toward a similar moral crisis, and that I wasn't expecting, because everyone looked up to the West during the communist days and looked at that as the place where there's the land of opportunity, and so we didn't really question too much the motives of our government, as probably we should have. Now I can see we should have, but at the time I wasn't assuming that, and I was, your typical Christian who had prayed for his government and prayed for the president, and or if I was in Canada, I'd pray for the prime minister, and we believed that God would answer our prayers, and we'd move on, and they'd do their job, and we'd do ours, right? Mm-hmm. And so that I pretty much, and I was one of those kind of people that gave people the benefit of the doubt and didn't assume every time I met somebody they were trying to cheat me. So that was, I was very much like that myself. I like approaching people. I like meeting people. I like learning from people. So having a very sarcastic worldview was not in my DNA either. Mm-hmm. And so after we moved back from the UK, I started into business, and I basically decided, okay, I'm going to try to be successful in business and be honest. And that was one of my criteria. Now, some people thought that was naive. I can see now that was naive. Mm-hmm. That business is a different environment, has a different moral base, and there's a good biblical description. There's many times there's wolves in sheep's clothing, and one of the things I've learned over the years is that these wolves are very adept at fooling Christians who they know are giving them the benefit of the doubt. And that, if I could say there's one lesson I've learned, that's one. And yet I don't want to be cynical with every relationship that I have. But I've learned you have to be careful, because there are a lot of wolves out there who specifically use that opportunity, that time they get, while the Christian is giving them the benefit of the doubt, to basically tear their assets apart, tear their life apart, take advantage of it, steal from them, whatever. There's a lot of those kind of people out there. So when I started the software business, I was looking to build software and market it, and I didn't really know the bigger picture of the internet, and except that it looked like a promising mechanism for building a business. Hindsight shows me that was naive. hindsight shows that the internet has never been anything but a weaponized network for the intelligence agencies in our planet. And that's a very quick description of what 10 years of dealing with the aftermath of winning and losing our Facebook lawsuit. But let me step back a minute and say we sued Facebook for we got our patents started. Our patents started to be issued in 2006. And we started then looking around to see who was infringing our patent, and pretty much we saw everybody. So we decided to sue Facebook. And at the time, Facebook and MySpace were the two primary platforms. And we sued them in late 2008 and started preparing for trial. The trial occurred in July of 2010. And we had a very good law firm that was pursuing the case. And we proved on 11 of 11 counts that Facebook is infringing our patent. And then the court turned around and rejected our claims anyway on a trumped-up charge that we had tried to sell the technology too soon. And you can't possibly understand the esoteric nature of this rule. It's called on sale bar, and I'm not even going to try right now. But basically, it was an attorney-fabricated claim that protected Facebook. Now, they didn't fulfill any of the legal requirement to prove that, and yet the courts supported it anyway, all the way through the appeals court, all the way to John Roberts and the Supreme Court. This was in 2012, we then looked at the situation and said, what is going on here? And, being a person who believed that our court system was there to protect us as citizens, the first thing that stood out like a sore thumb was we started looking at the financial statements of the judges that were involved in our case, and we found that all of them had massive amounts of Facebook interests that they did not disclose. And at an ethical level, they should have recused themselves, and they didn't. And so then we said, well, whoa, that stinks. And so I had a choice. I mean, I could have walked away, and nobody probably would have faulted me for saying, okay, you tried, you didn't make it, and move on. And the engineer in me wanted to figure it out, wanted to figure out what's going on here. Why did we not get treated fairly in our court? And that began a trek in 2012 that's led to today. And I think I'll stop there and see if you have any questions.
Well, again, I mean, there's so many questions that come to mind. I'm thinking in terms of that time frame between when you were creating this technology and when it actually became used by the powers that be and the people that stole it from you. Can you fill us in just a little bit on how, so it was in the 90s, I heard 1997, as far as, I think that might have been a pivotal year for you. Was that when you actually did come up with that aha moment, or am I wrong about that? Did I hear that wrong?
No, 97 was when we started the company, and I put a development team together, and then we spent the next 2.5 years inventing. And it was in late 99, it was actually Christmas of 1999, when we had the aha moment and figured out why the current market that was led by IBM and AT&T and Novell Groupwise and Lotus Notes, why they were not going to be able to scale their technology to the internet. When we saw that, and because most of us had done one of the major systems on the planet, in defense, in banking, in even we had a group from satellite and missile imagery systems in the Air Force, and basically a very skilled group of people. So when we had the aha moment, we all knew it was special. And so that's why I made a beeline to Washington to start working on filing patents to protect our invention. So we were very secretive and very clear that we knew we had something special and we're going to protect it. So that was in 1999. that was when we had the idea. We had done some coding, but the serious coding then occurred over the next 3 years. So we developed a total of about 750,000 lines of source code, about 145,000 man hours to build it. But the innovation really occurred in late '99.
Okay.
But as you know, you don't magically have the innovation. Sometimes it takes years to get to the point where you've eliminated everything else and then realize what it should be.
Unless
so
you're
that's all
Mark
part
Zuckerberg.
of the creative process.
I'm sorry. I was going to say, unless you're Mark Zuckerberg, because then you can do it over the spring break. It's amazing.
Right.
Yeah, I the sarcasm is right there at the tip of my tongue. But I'm thinking about the political the situation at that time. For those that may not remember, that was when Bill Clinton was actually president, and apparently Al Gore was inventing the internet at that time. Again, a rather sarcastic view of things, but Bill Clinton wasn't necessarily as advertised either. Right now we're focusing a lot on the Clinton Foundation and Hillary Clinton and all the ne'er-do-wells in that situation. But in fact, this goes right back. I mean, I remember you saying that you felt that Bill Clinton was actually a CIA operative. Am I right about that, or am I mischaracterizing that, or can we set that up a little bit to give a sense of what was actually happening politically as well at the same time?
Okay. Well, none of those things were even on my radar screen at the time. They have come to the radar screen in the last 2 or 3 years as we peeled back the onion layers of this corruption, because somebody stole from us. The judges were in on it. That we had proven. We didn't know why. And to cut a 5 years of investigation short here, we've recognized that this intention by our government to control the internet and to control, monitor communications and surveillance, mass surveillance, has been a plan of the government since the early 90s. It goes back to George H.W. Bush, Daddy Bush. And so there's been a long-term plan to have this mechanism for spying and government control for a long time. And so if we go through the 1990s, when Clinton was in power, a lot of those mechanisms were being set up at the time. There were some groups. The FBI was involved with it. There's a group called the Highlands Forum that became the Highlands Group, was really the spiritual center of this plan. And then you had a lot of laws being changed and altered during that period of time. And then IBM was very central to that all through the 90s. And now what I'm going to share with you, we've only recently discovered. But it has become clear that coming into the late 90s and early 2000s, this group of people believed that IBM and Microsoft were going to provide the technology that was needed to make this collaboration work on a large scale. But they were focused on solutions that they had all had for a decade, called groupware. And if you remember Lotus Notes and various types of collaborative environments that were really popular in the 90s, they were popular to the point that they were almost a religion. So you ask anybody that during that period, if it didn't involve Lotus Notes, there used to be a saying, and you never got fired for hiring IBM. And they bought Lotus Notes, and it was going to be the answer to everything in the internet. So by the late 1990s, this was part of we assumed that too, actually, for years. And then our magic aha moment was we realized, hey, that technology is not going to work in the internet. It cannot work and will not work. That was our aha moment. So we pushed all the papers off the drawing board and we started over. And that's when we had the innovation. And so what people experience now with, you share a photo on any of these platforms, and 1 million people can see it. That is our invention. How that happens, and so really, to kind of summarize it a little bit more, it's a new type of metadata. It's not like the old type of metadata. It's a whole new type where people can exchange information without passing around whole files all the time. Because if you've ever had somebody send you a megabyte attachment to an email, if that person's sending it out to 100 people, there's 100 megabytes of files floating around. Well, we figured out how to do that with maybe 10,000 bytes. Mm-hmm. And so that was the innovation. And so by the time this I'll call it, I'm going to give it a name, this deep state shadow government was planning on moving forward with IBM and Microsoft, they realized they were getting stuck. And as fate would have it, as God would have it, I guess, that was when we came along. And when I showed it to our attorney, who we had engaged in Washington, D.C., it's now clear he was working with this other group, and he knew they needed this technology, and so therefore they set out to steal it from the day one. We were screwed from the moment we ever went to Washington, is the bottom line. And and yet that's only something we've recently discovered.
How did you actually meet up with that particular lawyer? Was that somebody that was referred to you, or was it somebody that you knew prior to that time? Or do you feel like he was put on to you, now in hindsight?
Nobody knows what they don't know, but it was a networked introduction that I believe was not pre-planned, but it was serendipitous for them. So I was introduced to somebody who was introduced to somebody else who introduced us to him, and then we got to him. So it was 4 layers of introductions. So I really don't think there was pre-planned. It was a pre-planned thing, but once they knew what we had, then it was all planned.
All of a sudden, it's funny how the word gets out when you've got a good network of people that are keeping their eyeballs on things like this. Now, something that people may not understand is that patent law is one of the most corrupt areas of law, I guess, and coincidentally, that was the area of law that Hillary Clinton herself chose to pursue when she first became a lawyer. I think her dad, who was not exactly the most upstanding individual, suggested that she go into that area of law, and it's quite well known to me now, of course I didn't know it then, that those are the very people that will be complicit in stealing patents. And one of the things about patents is, from my understanding of patents, is that that's what you want to secure first of all. It's like Monsanto wanting to buy up every single aspect of humanity so that they can put a patent on it, including the cure for cancer, whatever. We know that there are other cures, but it's really quite evil when you think about how they're going to monetize everything in the world, including our DNA, is seriously something that they're looking at doing, some of these companies. So unless we understand the whole area and the nature of patent law, sometimes this is lost to people. And I wonder if the deep state is closely associated with that entire group, that crew.
Well, now I'm sure of it. This is one area where I approach the patent system as honorable, and that was probably my mistake as a Christian. And that puts us in a disadvantage because what I now know is that being a patent lawyer is a license to steal. Now, that doesn't mean all patent lawyers are thieves, but it does mean that the patent system itself is... let's put it this way, there are many motives that don't necessarily care whether the inventor is protected or not. But if you think about it from the standpoint of a professional corporate thief, what better way to get new ideas than pick off the patent ideas as they're still on the drawing board from an inventor? I mean, it's brilliant if you don't have any morals.
Well, this reminds me a little bit of the academic world, too, because a lot, it's the publish or perish concept when you are a tenured professor. and you think about all the thesis ideas that come across your desk, that perhaps even that get rejected, and that suddenly appear in that academic's work down the road. And so I think it's akin to that. A lot of people have had that experience where their ideas or their work has been published under another name, and they have no way of really verifying. As you know, as a writer, I used to send emails to myself quite a bit with ideas, and we do what we can to protect ourselves, I suppose. But that protection can only go so far, because if the courts are complicit, then we're going to have a very difficult time being able to support our claim, even if there is a patent involved. I think that's the part that, for me, is the really naive part. And I told you a little bit about having a trademark in Canada, and how that can be just taken out from under you if somebody else decides that they own it, even though you've gone through the proper vetting process. And so I've had a slight sampling of that, but I think the problem is that people go, oh, well, if they have a patent, then of course they can just go to the courts and they can have that upheld. And so clearly there must be some problem with those of us that have gone through the proper channels. We become the ones that seem to be
right.
I get, go ahead. Sorry. I think
we've got. I understand your point. I think that I've come to conclude that we have a number of various institutional feeder systems that essentially prey on creative people as a mechanism, as a intentional mechanism to eventually exploit the ideas that are exploitable. And it's in academia, it's in the venture capital world, it's in the patent system, and they're all designed to take the young and naive and inexperienced idea creators. And for all of us who are like that, you don't have time for all this nonsense. You just want to really focus on solving a problem or fixing something or being creative. And that's the image of God in us, to have an idea and to articulate it into being. I mean, that's the creative process. And yet these people aren't creative. All they know how to do is exploit and steal. And I think that in the big picture kind of defines evil. And so consequently, we've got a lot of institutions that we pray for a lot that need a lot more prayer, because they are indeed, they have many ways to Sunday to take something that even is issued, like a patent or a trademark, and undo it if they want to. There's many ways to Sunday to do that.
And you are relying so heavily on the expertise of, say, a lawyer in that case, and you do actually, and it isn't always the lawyer. It can go beyond that too. But of course, there you were in Washington D.C., which is we now know as the swamp. And without getting into that too much, I think we understand that Washington D.C. is a place unto itself. In fact, it really does have its own jurisdiction. And so some people may not understand that too, that they have their own police department, they have their own, I guess it's the Capitol Police, is it? That so just as an example, there's things that go on in D.C. itself that may supersede some of the other things that are going on in the country. So there is that aspect too. Is that something that you noticed?
The separate jurisdiction of the District of Columbia I'm aware of, and the fact that they have their own set of rules and they have a separate corporation. There's a lot of game. I think the bottom line is, when you get a group of lawyers together, they can play more games than Carter has liver pills. And what we've got now is so many layers of gaming, and it's all self-serving. It's all to support a system that is basically feeding itself and taking care of itself, with the taxpayers at the other end of that feeding that network. And I mean, that's just that is the system. So the patent game is a lawyer's game for sure. and secondarily bankers who then fund the groups that want to exploit the better ideas. Mm-hmm. And in our case, there was a third layer, and that was the intelligence world. The intelligence world, as we've now can see very clearly, wanted to control internet transactions and internet communication and to monitor it all. And they couldn't do it with the old IBM and Microsoft legacy groupware technology. And so they realized that our solution was the elegant next step and basically set out to steal it. And they did steal it. And if you remember, the social networking world really emerged like a phoenix in 2004. Well, that's because on October 28th of 2003, we finally debugged the last module in our system, and it was ready. It was ready for prime time. And magically, that was the same night that Zuckerberg hacked the house sites at Harvard. Surprise, surprise.
Is there any sense, before we move on with that part of it, is there any sense that there might have been infiltration into your own organization? This is something that happens a lot, but how did you vet the people that were working on this project with you?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was our patent attorney, the person we were sharing our most intimate details about how the invention occurs.
Okay, so I was just thinking in terms of people that were involved in the coding itself, because you do have to have a certain amount of rapport and trust with those that are working, although I guess it is a fairly compartmentalized process. I don't know if you can sort of quickly let people know how that works when you are creating a new code. You have a problem, I imagine you're sitting down a creative group of people. Do you designate certain parts of that and delegate, or do you work together as a team, or do you come together at certain parts, or do you compartmentalize like they do in some of the other organizations where you keep things kind of separate so that you don't lose your idea? Do you know?
Well, we took reasonable measures to protect our idea, physical security, electronic security, need to know, those kinds of things. So we did take very strenuous precautions there. Physical security had all the kind of typical things you have for locks, double locks, that kind of thing. So the design effort was very much a team effort. And bottom line is, none of my individual developers, until we actually got done, had enough to do anything with it. So, you never know what you don't know. But I really believe that this was, we pretty much traced back when it happened, and it was a situation where our attorney had taken custody of a copy of the source code for a project that he had introduced us to with Lawrence Livermore National Laboratories. And that was his excuse. And then we discovered many years later that 10 weeks later, all of those ideas in that code appeared in the next version of IBM and Eclipse Foundation. So it could have been inside, but I don't think so.
Right. And just eliminating all the possibilities for those that might have those kind of questions, as I do. Now, as far as the political scenario there, we did talk a little bit about Bill Clinton. I don't want to necessarily pick on one person. It's just that he was the president. So we think of these folks that are in those kind of positions as somehow doing what they say they're going to do. I think we're a little less naive about that at this point, because we can see things unfolding. But at that time, and I think even till recently, people really do have faith in the political, the people in those situations. They know there's corruption, but I don't think they understand the degree, or even the fact that people are put into specific strategic positions, including the presidency. Is that something that would play a part in this whole story?
Yeah, we've recently discovered that a number of things were going on from the Clinton era through the Bush era through the Obama era that are real critical to understanding how deeply this rabbit hole, how deep this rabbit hole is. And there's a couple of things that were going on that have been going on since '78, and one is this some organization, a secret organization, but not secret, called the Senior Executive Service. And what we discovered that there's about 10,000 employees of the federal government that were implemented under Jimmy Carter and have carried forward that don't really report to the president, and it's like a fifth column organization. So we had that going on. And then what we've discovered is that we've had senior officials, including the Clintons, basically manipulating our system and the naivete of the citizenry to basically make money on our backs. And there's many ways you could take this conversation, but from the standpoint of our technology, what these people we have discovered wanted is they needed a good way to communicate using this new internet technology, and we became it. So the degree to which they were able to then take that invention and then exploit it is the story of modern social networking. They created a bunch of brands to give the idea of diversity and put them out there under different brand names, including Facebook and others. And then now people are beginning to finally realize that, hey, this data all seems to be going to one place. And it's called your dark profile, and it's run by a rogue CIA.
So for those people that, are saying, well, I have nothing to hide, and, I don't mind, and they're putting every single thing they ever do and everything they eat on social media, I guess it really goes beyond anything to do with our personal our lives, but it's to do with the idea that we live in a surveillance state, and it's something that Orwell could never even pictured, because he didn't have even in the 90s or 80s we couldn't have pictured the kinds of tentacles that are going into every area of our life, including the apps on our phone and that sort of thing too. We know it theoretically, but we don't understand the depth of it, I think. And so we've got people now who are suing, naively in my opinion, suing Mark Zuckerberg, because they're finally seeing that things are not as they seem, and they're looking at it as a political situation, that it's been used for political means, but in fact it's far more nefarious than that, would you say?
I mentioned that all of these companies were created for the purpose of giving people various features of the same underlying technology. And if people need to realize that the purpose for doing that was to basically gather data on citizens. And it was to violate our privacy, and they got very clever about how they did it with their user license agreement, and how the agreement says you own your data and you give it all to us, and then we can use it. And so they've got themselves covered legally. And I think the real issue here is people don't see what's going on in the digit world, in the unseen world of the internet. And I think that's why they're not more incensed about the invasion of their privacy. So, for example, if you walk home tonight and there's a whole group of people rummaging through your files at home, you're going to call the police, aren't you?
Yeah, well, exactly.
Are you? Are you? Well, then that's exactly what they're doing on the internet, and yet you say, oh, well, I don't have anything to hide. It's the same thing. I mean, it's why we started a revolution, was over the unwarranted search and seizure of our properties and possessions of papers.
Correct, yeah.
And yet this time around, we're just totally silent as lemmings walking off of a cliff. So I think people need to realize why they're collecting the data, and they think because I'm a good person, I don't have anything to hide. Well, that's not the point. The point is that you have a right to privacy, whether you think you do or not. If you don't preserve your privacy, you then don't preserve your property, and you become a part of a totalitarian state. Well, the real true purpose of the collection of data is not to know that last night you ate a pizza. It's to collect all that data over time and then create a dark profile of you as a person. And these algorithms are getting quite sophisticated. So a person puts an Alexa in their home, and so they think, well, we're not saying anything, we're just joking around, and and the kids are playing and blah blah blah. Well, all of that data is being collected because it all becomes gives them an ability to profile who you are as a person. And when is that valuable? That's valuable when you get ready to vote, for example. And that information can be used to target certain advertising and certain memes and certain ways of talking and certain stories on the news that will influence you to vote a certain way. And you don't even realize it's happening, and it's all subliminal. And of course, everybody's proud, and they don't believe that's possible, but it's very possible, and it is happening. So we're giving up all of our sovereignty as human beings, made in the image and likeness of God, to these people who have only evil intent.
It ties in a lot with the concept of MK Ultra from my perspective, and we do know that there's been a lot of experimentation starting who knows when, but it's definitely back in the 40s and 50s, where there was this idea of being able to control one another, through mind control. And if we look at it in its most sinister form, there is a group of people who do see themselves as being better and more deserving of everything, whether it's your wealth or your information or even your life, than other people are. And they do have a lot to hide at this point as well, because they've kind of gone on with impunity. So this is the other part about the media and about the way that people use this data, because they can actually use it to control our minds. And I think that's another step that people have a difficult time wrapping their heads around, literally, wrapping your heads around the idea that your head is not your own. I mean, all that we really have that we own is our thoughts, our free will. And I think that's really the bottom line for me, is that God has given us free will. And anybody that wants to come along, whether it's our friend or our neighbor or our government or whomever, when they want to start taking away our ability to think clearly and think on our own, there has to be a scheme behind that. There has to be some agenda.
Jesus gave us a brilliant marker and a gauge for whether somebody else's conduct or our own is moral. And it's the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And if somebody is stealing my personal data, then I have to ask myself, would I do that to them? And if the answer is no, then you better stop them doing it to you.
Right, and the other question is why, So I'm just going back to the idea of when you were creating this amazing technological, the underpinning of everything that we're doing now. It was, as a lot of things are with Tesla, with his idea of free energy, it was with the idea of connecting people and creating a network whereby people could interact. Is that a good characterization if you were to do the elevator speech on what it is that you were trying to do at that time?
Yeah, the idea was to assist people in being able to come together in communities that they would choose and be able to interact more easily remotely. In other words, you didn't have to be together to interact with those that you want to create a community relationship with. Mm-hmm. And so it was be able to basically create the benefits that we have in church with fellowship and giving and sharing and the like in using the electronic technology. So in the design of the system, what I think is important to point out is the original system had a rule that basically said if you host the data, if you host the environment, you own the data. And so you own the rules for how the data is shared. And So with any group, you might have one set of rules for one group and a different set of rules for a different group, and that's your prerogative as the host of that environment. So we had a slider scale in the system so that you could set it from 0 to 10. So 0 would be no security, totally open on the internet, and 10 would be it's only data I can see. And so anywhere in the middle, you can set that and exchange the data. What the government did with it is they just ripped out that scale and basically said, it's all 0, we're going to own everything. And then we're going to have you sign this user license agreement that is thousands of pages long that basically says, we get a right to everything you do. And that was their excuse for taking all your data. In signing the user license agreement, you gave away all of your privacy and property rights in intellectual property, all of them. I mean, it's such a violation of the Constitution. It's just
unbelievable.
obscene.
Yeah. So what we have at stake here at this point, and just before we go into the actual nuts and bolts of it, really the stakes are not only that they will have to reset things and move it up to 10, or open it up and allow people to have that privilege of privacy. Privilege, the right, actually, of privacy.
That's right.
Then it's not only that, but it's what they have gathered and what they've collected over the years, and also the kind of activities that they've undergone that they're trying to now keep secret. And I think that's why the present, without it being Trump or anybody else, it's just any threat to that, to expose it to the light, is going to be. It's going to meet with a huge amount of resistance. Can we agree on that?
Well, I think we human beings are creatures of habit, so anything we get used to is resisted when somebody wants to change it on us, whether it's good for us or not. So, yeah, I mean, it's obvious that would be an issue.
Well, I'm thinking when it comes to exposing actual people that we have, we hold in fairly high esteem. I'm thinking about various politicians throughout the years. If this were to come to light, there's more at stake than just the idea of the social media aspect of things. It's the fact that these there was stealing going on, but also the information that has been collected that a lot of people have suspected will actually come out into the public, and there will be an outrage, I believe. Well, hopefully. I mean, I'm just.
Well, we need to pull the plug on those databases.
Right. Okay. Now, tell me a little. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, just pull the plug.
And as far as where you are now you've been successful. I believe that there was a two-part decision made when you actually took this to the Supreme Court, if I'm understanding it correctly. The part about the patent was actually upheld. Is that true?
It was a split decision at the district court. Okay. We proved on 11 of 11 claims that Facebook is infringing our patent. And then they accused us, without proving it, that we tried to sell the invention too soon, and then the court supported that as the reason to overturn the case. So we never actually won. We won and we lost. We appealed that decision to the Federal Circuit in Washington, D.C., a 3-judge panel, and they refused to change the lower court's decision. We then appealed it again to the Supreme Court, and John Roberts didn't choose to take up the case, and also didn't choose to disclose that he had masses of Facebook interests as well.
Well, this is, I think, what I was getting at with the previous question, is that the players here, the people that you're actually hoping will that you'll prevail with as far as the patent and the logic of the whole thing, have it's such a ball of wax that a lot of them are actually tied up in whether it's the cover up or the stealing or the shares in Facebook or whatever it is. It's such a network of people that have now got a stake in things that it's hard to get a fair hearing in any case. It is what you've proved.
That's what we have. That's what we've noticed also, and therefore we're taking a different tack. We have filed something called the Miller Act notice with the president, and we've asked him to basically, hey, our shareholders have not been paid for 17 years of the government and all of the government's public-private partners using our technology and invention without paying us, and we want paid. And that's essentially what the Miller Act notice is. It's saying, please pay us. It's like a lien that a subcontractor would put on a house where they didn't get paid. And in the federal contracting world, you can't do that. So you can file a Miller Act notice, which is what we've done. And so that is we're basically saying and seeing that the federal court system related to patents is utterly corrupt. And there's no point in wasting our time anymore with that group of people. That system has to be completely, probably dismantled and rebuilt. And so we've said, okay, Mr. President, you have the power and authority in this situation, since the theft of our code was really driven out of the White House, and it was, with all these executive orders and things that Bush and Clinton and Obama have all written. You have the authority to pay us. And so we're asking to be paid. And then in addition to that, we're saying, okay, when you pay us, going forward, we'd like $2 a user for all those apps that everybody's got on their phones, and that's a reasonable number. And then the government can also add a fee for internet usage, so the government could generate $200 to $600 billion in new revenue just through this Miller Act notice. So we think we've come up with a very creative way of getting compensated and at the same time addressing the issues you're talking about, that people are already used to this technology, and what do we do with it going forward. We're saying, fine, you can continue to use it, but we want pay. We want paid, and we want those providers to pay us, and it's a win-win. And at the same time, we'll give a license to everyone every user on the planet right now is using our technology with no license. And most people aren't even aware of it. So we're saying, okay, we'll provide a site license to everyone who's using our technology all over the world, and here's the solution.
Because you actually have the right under the terms of the patent to pull the whole thing. I mean, you could, if you wanted to be a meanie and say, okay, I'm just going to take this back, you could, in fact, put a halt to the use. I mean, could you do that through, I'm just wondering how you would be able to do that. But basically, you own the technology that we all use. So this has huge implications for every one of us. If you were to just say, you know what, I'm pulling the licensing and you can't use it anymore, would they not just carry on using it despite that? Or how do you see that? What is there any reason to believe that you could do that, to actually enact that part of the patent and be able to pull?
Well, I mean, I think the question is, it could be redefined this way.
Okay.
Are we a country of laws, or are we not? Mm-hmm. And if we are a country of laws, then it is the government's job, having issued us a patent, to act on our behalf and protect our patent. So I think most people naively think, well, I'm going to sue them. And what I've learned is that that ain't going to happen. That the system, that these courts have already made the decision on your case before you got there. And I hate to be so, and that probably sounds sarcastic, but that has been my experience. Mm-hmm. And so, therefore, the idea of pulling something sounds interesting and bombastic and everything else, but practically speaking, if the powers that be are not respecting our laws, then they ain't going to get anywhere.
Well,
that's the situation we have right now. Is the powers that be are not respecting our laws. We are in a lawless situation. We just don't realize it as laymen.
Well, it's interesting because it does say, I think it's Romans 10. I think it's talking about the gospel, but in the case of this is my personal interpretation of it, but when we've heard something, like if we hear that the technology that we're using, for instance, is illegal in the sense that you do own the patent and it's been stolen by the government or any other entity, then those of us that do have a belief in there being a system of laws are in a moral dilemma, I suppose. If we wanted to look at it as more of the spirit of the law than the letter of the law, you have both going for you. But those that are trying to protect their own interests with patents and whatever, trademarks and corporate, I'm thinking of corporations because they do have some rights as well over I'm thinking about the name of your internet site. If you have a domain, then there's some priority use that you're allowed to have, say if you're a big corporation, that sort of thing. So if you're not, like this breaks down the entire rule of law. If people are just going ahead and using it once they know, once you understand that what you're doing is a violation of someone's rights. I'm not sure if I'm articulating that right. I'm basically just doing a soapbox, I think, but I'm thinking about it in terms of once you know, you have the responsibility to decide. And it's like downloading songs or whatever for musicians. It's a violation of their copyright. And so we've heard from courts about that and that is, there are various sites that were closed down because of that. So this is that on steroids, like Napster on steroids, where you're stealing constantly every time you use an app or every time, like even me talking to you right now. It's a stealing of the technology, or is that overstating it?
Well, not my leg of it because I'm on the phone. But anything to do with the internet and collaborative work in social networking is probably infringing our patent. So I think that the real key is to realize that our system of intellectual property protection is broken, has been hijacked, and in fact, we've just now recently discovered that the patent office is now not even run by an American corporation. It is run by a company out of England called Serco. Mm-hmm. I mean, when I found this, I was just outraged that the information that entrepreneurs or inventors are sharing with the patent office is being managed by a foreign corporation beholden to the Queen and not the U.S. Constitution.
Well, now
that's outrageous.
We enter into an entirely new strata there because we could, I'm speaking to you from Canada, and of course we were raised in a colony. It was actually called the Dominion of Canada when I was very young. And we were raised with this idea that the monarchy has our best interests at heart and that sort of thing. And what we find now, and what I understand to be the case, all of my training, I came up in a military family too on top of that. So, there's a lot of allegiance to the Queen in the same way that there's an allegiance to the flag in the States. And so it's very difficult for people to understand that the monarchy is actually at the apex of the property, literal property, the real estate, and intellectual property that's being stolen. And now when you talk about England being involved, we need to understand that they've always been involved to some extent. We see the tie-in there with the collusion, so-called, with the Christopher Steele tie-in. There's huge implications here with England being involved. And because basically, as you say, it's under the jurisdiction of the Queen now. The patents that
all occurred in 2006. We got our patent in 2006, so Serco was just coming online at that time. But everything since then has been managed. All the patent applications have been managed by Serco, and so it's just an outrageous situation where it appears that our government agencies, through the senior executive service, have all long ago took down the borders of our country. So now they're just trying to perfect the physical takedown of our borders as well. But the contractual takeover seems to have already occurred.
So the senior executive services seems to be at the heart of this. There is a move to really bring this to light so that Trump can actually take action, because there's a lot of different solutions to this. I mean, these are government employees. It's just that their positions are sacrosanct, I guess, in the sense that they're not under presidential control. They're seen as the people that carry on the government, no matter who is administrating the government. And I think that's the original so-called intent, but really it was always set up to supersede the political process in a way, or to undermine it, as far as I understand the way that it's structured.
Well, one thing's for sure, they certainly take care of themselves, and they give themselves raises every year. They're paid, starting pay starts at what the vice president gets, and it appears that they don't even do any work. They just outsource everything to foreign companies. And so, I mean, it's just outrageous what we're learning about the senior executive service.
So if the senior...
I mean, for us who are out there creating things from scratch, to see these people taking care of themselves and feeding off of the average working person in America is, I can't pick any other word. It's outrageous.
So for those people that are now, getting outraged, and they're looking at what is it? The Cambria. I'm just trying to remember the name of the company that has Analytica. Sorry, I should have it in front of me. But the company that has been taking information and basically selling it, and collecting information from Facebook and using it for political purposes. They will look at Cambria Analytica. Is that what? Do I have that right? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't know. I know what you're talking about, but I don't have all those at the tip of my tongue.
Well, I'm hoping that there will be people that will just say, that's what you want. I really rely on the audience to be able to let me know. But I will look it up after the show, and I'll add it in, and we'll have a link to that. But what people are doing right now is they're wanting to sue Mark Zuckerberg, and they're wanting to sue this person, that person. They really don't. They're running around like chickens with their heads cut off, wanting to know what to do now that their eyes are open. But it's only as far as the political aspect of this. And what I have suggested is that folks get aware of what you're doing, and to get behind your initiative with a very tangible initiative to reclaim what is yours. And I think if people wanted to continue using the technology that they've become used to, and they wanted to do, there you go, Cambridge Analytica. Thank you very much, JP. So people are finally. I know there are politicians in Canada, for instance, that are all incensed, and they're sort of going, well, gosh, we really need to do something. We need to pass a bill so that Facebook can't do this, and it's so misplaced as far as understanding what the entire situation is from its inception to what we're having.
I think people need to realize that all of the names that they know over these social networking companies are all cardboard cutouts. So you're wasting your time suing those personalities. What you've got to start doing is looking at their handlers. Who are their handlers? Asking who their handlers are, and those are the people that you need to deal with. These cardboard cutouts are just going to give talking points.
Can I ask you?
They've got no power.
To give a little idea about, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to put a name to the cardboard cutout of Mark Zuckerberg, because he was put out front. I sort of see him as the Lee Harvey Oswald of the situation. He's not exactly a patsy. He's made billions, but he's also taking money out at an enormous rate. And I think it scares people, because they understand that he's preparing for the takedown, I suppose, and enriching himself. But that outrages people. But in the first place, he was actually put there as a poster boy, I suppose, for Facebook, because he had the right image. But he ostensibly created this code over a break that he had, and then went between exams or something, I don't know. And so can you just give us a little bit of what you know about Mark Zuckerberg and how that situation emerged?
Well, He was a 19-year-old at Harvard who claims to have written the entire Facebook, the first version of Facebook, in a week and a half while he's studying for finals, chasing girls, and drinking beer. And that's all testimony in the ConnectU case that he gave testimony to. Contrast that with what it took us to build the code, which was 750,000 lines of code, 145,000 man hours, and at that time of the trial, $10 million, but it's now been $20 million to build. That's what it really takes to build a piece of software. So all of these myths that were created out of the Social Network movie were all intended to fool the masses, the average person who doesn't know about software, doesn't know that you can't write code that fast, doesn't know anything about what goes on behind the scenes with software. So they got away with it. And they did it with a movie and a book. Then it was just all lies. So the bottom line is he was a willing 19-year-old who was willing to be propped up in front of a company with very experienced players behind him who were telling him what to do and when to do it, because they wanted a Harvard story. They wanted to start this thing called Facebook, and these were primarily all the people that had just sold out PayPal and were looking for their next big win. And when you then peel back that layer, you see the National Venture Capital Association. And then if you go back to 1999 and Bill Clinton, you see a rogue CIA organization called In-Q-Tel was developed to provide private venture capital out in Silicon Valley for promising ideas. So, it's amazing to me that the news of In-Q-Tel is just now starting to come to people's consciousness. But when you think about it, how can a government entity have a private venture capital arm?
Yes. Yes, things that make you go, It's amazing. And the CIA themselves have been involved in so many different venture capital ideas, whether it's, arms, drugs. I mean, we've seen it with Iran-Contra. It's like they can continue to do the same old, and people seem to forget very quickly what these people are doing and the money that they have to do it. It's not accounted for in any budget.
If you think about it, it's a brilliant strategy. Have the government team up with private companies, form a venture capital arm, which gets capital to invest in private companies, and then basically you're funding the intelligence operation without going through Congress.
That's
your own money.
That's the nugget right there. I think if we can sort of get the concept, then we can begin to understand that it's all through all of the different social media platforms, and people will say, well, I've been demonetized on YouTube, or my Twitter account has been shadow banned, or whatever it is, not realizing that these are not private companies as we know them or as we think we know them. And then you have this debate back and forth. Well, they're private. They can have their own terms of service that you're violating. But what is the line between a public and a private entity? And
they were never private companies. They were never private companies. That was just the front end to fool people. They've always been government organized and funded organizations to build a universal surveillance system, period.
So we're talking about YouTube, we're talking about Twitter, we're talking about Facebook, we're talking about any, and I'm thinking cloud-based anything, pretty much. If it's a Google entity, then you're basically just giving everything. I'm thinking Google Docs, everything is basically owned by the people that you are sharing that information with, those people are the black ops. I mean, they're the shadow government. So if you have that inkling, you're right, and it goes much deeper and much farther than you can even imagine. What can people do as far as, I guess, being aware of, first of all, what you are doing, but also, that's my job, is to try and make people aware of it and to spread the news. And I do hope that people will take an interview like this and share it, or at least digest some of the information and go to your website. I mean, you have just a wealth of information on your, not the Leader Technologies. I mean, that's a whole other uh, resource, but you have a site that is specifically designed to give people information about the situation leading up to your current negotiations, I guess, with the government. But can you tell us a little bit about your website that explains all of this information, gives the background and all of the timeline, that sort of thing? It's a great website. Can you tell us a little bit about how that came to be and when you started doing that and how people can access it?
Yeah, after the Supreme Court denial, we started looking at, okay, what's gone wrong? But we have to start answering our question with hard evidence. And as that started coming, a bunch of people, mostly our shareholders, but not just our shareholders, said we need to put up a website and start posting this this research. And we weren't sure at the time where it was going. So it's a collective effort. It's called Americans4Innovation.blogspot.com. And it's a site basically to publish the evidence that has been found to prove everything I'm telling you is true. And it's taken 5 or 6 years to really see it mature. And a timeline kind of naturally emerged out of it that now encompasses pretty much the whole story from the founding of the CIA, the transfer of German scientists to the U.S. and their involvement in IBM and MK Ultra, and going forward and it gives you a different perspective. It gave me a different perspective of the times I was raised in than I ever thought was the case. And it carries right through our trial and the information from our trial, and carries up to the current day with a lot of the coverage we're getting now. So it's very much a collective effort, and it's called Americans for Innovation. And it's teamed up now with another organization called American Intelligence Media, which is a fantastic group of people, of like-minded patriots who are pretty much like us. Are saying we can't let this situation continue, and so basically they call themselves truth seekers, and they're one of their sites is aimfortruth.org, and then they've got other ones. But so the word is getting out and it's growing, and more people are getting involved. So that would be one place where people can have a resource to actually get hard evidence. This is all hard, indictable evidence, not just speculative.
Right, and one of the things that I see as being a very important aspect of this is to have the story kind of straight in our own minds, I suppose, in the way that we understand it. You know, it's difficult for some people to wrap their heads around how this all works. I see that when I go to the fbcoverup.com site, you have to go to the docs, and you see the timeline. It starts in 1947, just with your timeline here. And I haven't had a chance to go through the entire site, but it's important for us, I think, just generally to come against what we haven't learned in the school system, and to learn how to be critical thinkers and how to be researchers. Not, and I think one of the things, the psyop of Facebook, part of it is that we see a headline and we pass it along without even reading the article. And then dislike, it's actually a form of mind control that teaches us not to be critical thinkers. That's my take on it. And this is basically,
absolutely,
it's a way of coming up against that, even that mindset. And it's a course in critical thinking. Some of the people that I have on, like Dr. Judy Wood, we do a show where that's basically it. You go through her book, and it's not just about the events of 9/11 or what happened there from an engineering point of view, any of that stuff. It's let's take the evidence and see where it takes us. Let's open our minds to the idea that we don't have the proper thinking because we're coming in at a point in history. I'm thinking it's like being born, when you're a kid and you come into a family and you go, history starts now. You forget your parents actually met each other and they had a life before that and they were kids. And so if you want to put it into those terms, there's drama that takes place there, and you just aren't aware of it because we're so myopic in our thinking sometimes. So you've given us some really
that's been the benefit of the timeline, is that what seemed in the beginning to be unconnected events, when they start getting filled, when the timeline starts getting filled in, you realize these are not unconnected events. I'll give you one example. You mentioned 9/11. Well, that was September 11th of 2001. The IBM Eclipse Foundation, the main engine that gave away our code to the entire Silicon Valley, was founded on November 29th of 2001, the next month.
Coincidence?
So it's pretty clear that our intelligence world had a plan. The Patriot Act was already written, ready to be implemented, and the give up of our privacy and property was already in the works, and social media was going to be a key mechanism to push out these narratives like you're talking about. And you're right, this text meme generation is certainly not thinking critically and is trusting that if something comes up electronically, it must be true. And obviously it's created by people and they can't be true. You have to be critical. And we're raising a generation of people who are not thinking critically.
And I think added to that, just to be fair, there are, there's the big pharma aspect because there's the drug pushers out there, and then there's the, think what you will, but there's things being rained on us from the sky and, from the earth and the food that we eat and all the rest of it. And it seems that there's a general move to make us passive people and to put us into a slave situation, and it's not the first time in history, is it? I mean, it's one of those themes that you can see throughout time, where people are trying to escape slavery.
You started by asking me about my experience with the ministry, and we were working in the Soviet Union during Brezhnev's era, which many people would say is the height of the Cold War. And so I was seeing up front and personal with the people we were working with a totalitarian state where private property had been abolished. There was no such thing as intellectual property. They didn't even have a copyright. The Copyright Agency was just starting at the time. And they selected who was going to get higher education. They selected what schools you were going to go to. They controlled every aspect of your life. So this is not theoretical that we're talking about here. This has already occurred once in the last generation, and it appears there appears to be an intention by the people that pushed both the Bolshevik Revolution and the Nazi takeover in Germany to do it again. And it appears to be bankers. It appears to be powers that be, like you're saying, who have a long-term agenda to control people, and I don't understand that mechanism. I don't think that way. I think if you practice the golden rule and follow the Constitution, those are all we need to be a civil society. But they don't think that way, and so they are out to take it all. And in the process, they took my stuff, and that kind of ticked me off.
The art of understatement. I find it really interesting that we focus on 2001 because it was such a pivotal time, and a lot of people will try and ascribe motivations. So we want to get into war, we want to do this, it was to get rid of, the records that were there. I mean, you look back at 1994, I believe it was, when the Oklahoma City bombing. Coincidentally, there was a lot of information in that building that related to the situation that was taking place during the Iraq War, and the veterans that were getting sick, and the technologies that were being used, and you start looking into what was taking place during that time, and wow, we'll just well, they would never bomb an entire building and kill people, in the process, or they would never
Right.
destroy evidence in that way where people's lives were at stake. Well, my eyes were opened when they killed people at Kent State University. And you see that governments will actually turn on their own people. And the first step is to take their guns and to take their ability to defend themselves in any way possible. And part of that is our minds, our ability to think clearly. So, our guns
Well, I haven't seen as evil a group of people as I see today in the senior executive service and the things that are going on in the deep state as I had seen. I'm not saying this right. The evil people that I met in the Soviet Union, the KGB people and others who abused their citizens, are of similar ilk to the ones that are doing this today in our culture. And that is what I will try to do what I can do to make sure that doesn't repeat itself. But it appears history is repeating itself again. And that's what's most concerning to me.
Man, we could just go on and on about so many different things that this brings up, but I think we've given people a really good foundation in terms of what the situation is, whether it's your situation personally, how it affects us. This story is so fascinating in the sense that it has a global reach, and yet it has such a personal aspect to it as well. And so it really encompasses so many things about life on this planet right now. Things can affect us, personally.
Right.
In the blink of an eye, we can have, I think about the raid that goes on of a private attorney. And again, this is not a political thing, but I just look at the pretense by which people are able to disrupt the attorney-client privilege by just saying, well, we're going on a witch hunt. We're going to find something matter what.
That was nothing but thuggery in my view.
And people don't understand.
And it was typical abusive, authoritarian tyranny that I last saw in the Soviet Union.
It ties
This
in
is stuff they would do.
Exactly, and people don't understand that this could be your attorney. It's that do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Imagine if you had a court case, and let's just put it into the context of a family court case, and you have an attorney, and the opposing side is able to find false pretenses to be able to go and disrupt the attorney-client privilege and win their case on that basis, or to dig up dirt on you so that they can win by absolutely nefarious means. That to me is the most insidious part, because you're always going to be able to dig up something. I've had it myself where people are taking pictures of my social media account to somehow verify something that they're trying to put forward, and it's a really frightening prospect to think that our history.
Well, clearly these attorneys can indict these corrupt attorneys can indict a ham sandwich. So I think we're at this stage, we're probably not surprised by that. What we've got to do is do something about it.
Yes.
As citizens.
Yes, and I think that somebody I was listening to, I do believe it was Dan Bongino, I have to give him credit, he was saying that, and he was in the federal, he was a bodyguard for President Obama, but he also was an FBI agent, and he said that it used to be that the law, we would pursue the case, and then we would find the people behind it. In other words, you'd look at the bullet, and you'd find who committed the homicide, and then you would attach that to a person. And he said, what we're doing now is we're taking a person and we're trying to find the magic bullet, the bullet that, and even if it doesn't exist, we're trying to tie it to that person. We start with that. And it was
I had a perfect example of that in the Facebook trial. I watched the Facebook attorneys create fabricated evidence that they then used as the as the means to get the verdict overturned. And so I'm personally seen and watched it happen, and I watched the judge then dutifully shake his head in their favor. So that whole system is absolutely upside down corrupt.
And until we have reason to be involved with it, we don't think we will. But believe me, if you do something that somebody else doesn't like, I've had it happen serving on a board, and somebody was looking into my children. They're able to access that sort of thing online, and I'm thinking, what does that have to do with my service on a board? It's a frightening thing that we are coming to the point where we feel that we have the right to do anything that we need to do to get the other person. What used to be schoolyard bullies are now becoming fully fledged, they're politicians, they're people that are going to get you by any means possible, because we're living in a world that doesn't have the same moral compass that we had even in our time growing up. So it's a...
Stalin said it well. Stalin said, show me the man, I'll find you the crime.
Well, there you go. And I think that on that note, we should probably wind this up. I would love to be able to talk to you again about some of these more specific issues, but I'm hoping that we've given people enough information that they could take this, whether a podcast or whether a YouTube video or whatever it is, and to be able to pass it to other people who may not be aware, or who, I'm thinking about this petition that's going around right now where people are trying to actually, say that Mark Zuckerberg needs to go to court. I think it's a court case. I can't quite figure it out, but, it's such a waste of time. And I'm hoping that people will take that same energy and indignation and start looking into your case and supporting that, because I can imagine if people around the world, rather than saying, okay, I'm going to just use this technology with impunity, said, this isn't right, and it has implications for me, and it has implications for the Constitution, or in Canada for our rights, our ability to have freedom. We have a Charter of Rights and Freedoms, supposedly. And so, whatever it is, you see that this is what people are fighting for throughout history, is for their freedom, intellectual freedom, every type of freedom that we can imagine. And it's being taken away, folks, every step of the way here. And I think the church really needs to open its eyes. Do you have a message for the church? Or I'm sort of putting you on the spot here, but I know you're an evangelist, and so I'm hoping that we can maybe put out a special plea to the church, because I do believe that is our last vestige of morality right now.
Well, I do think that in my experience, Christian churches tend to stay away from politics, and there's a lot of pragmatic reasons for that, because you have a lot of people. And I heard a good expression the other day. The guy said, I'm not left wing and I'm not right wing. I want the whole bird. And I think churches need to start realizing that whatever your political views are, there's a moral battle going on here, and without the voice of spirituality and truth, the voices that are left end up being the opposite, and we're kind of suffering from our own silence in the public square. And I think we have to find ways to get into the public square and and make a difference. And I think that was going on at the founding of America, much more so than we see now. And I think that in the States, the rescission of the Johnson Amendment by President Trump was a great move in the right direction, because what the IRS did during Lyndon Johnson was made it so that you would lose your nonprofit status if you talked politics or what was deemed to be politics from the pulpit. And what Trump is saying, and I agree with that, is that we need the moral voices of Christians, of any moral people, of any religion, really. And yet all of those have been silenced by this Johnson Amendment, which has been rescinded. So I think that the real challenge is to find ways to be a moral voice in the public square and not be silent.
And maybe we can use Facebook for that purpose. Maybe we can use it for I just find that to be the ultimate irony if we can use the social media platforms that have been taken from you and that are rightfully yours to see justice being done in this case. And so I'm going to encourage people. What I do is I put information onto characterdriven.com. I try and put all of the links possible. I do encourage people to go directly to your site. If they go to the leader.com site, they can certainly get a lot of background on your business, that side of things. And then if they go to, now again, there's American Intelligence Media, which has some really great resources in and of itself there. But what about your site is the www.fbcoverup.com. That's one of them.
No, don't go there. Don't go there.
Don't go there. Okay.
That's just for documents. Where you want to go is americansforinnovation.blogspot.com. That's Americans, plural, with the number 4, innovation, all one word, .blogspot.com. And there you can then access, through that mechanism, the documents. And there's a timeline up there that's called a crime line, which is really what I recommend everybody go to now, because it's just a wealth of some people call it indictable evidence. In other words, if you have any doubts about anything I've told you, go there and see the actual facts.
Okay, well, I have had up on the screen the other site, which, it does have the docs there, and you're right, if you go to the main site, it's not going to give you the information you need. So I'm just going to quickly put that up. I do have a link here for Americans for Innovation so that people can actually see it up on the screen, and they can take a screenshot if they want to do that. If sometimes they don't have a pen available, or pencil for that matter. So here we have the information that Michael McKibben just gave us, so that I went through the process on the screen so that they can see how I got there. And hopefully people will support your work, but I think the best way that they can support it is to become to educate themselves and to do the research needed and to get indignant and to use that indignance in a way that is going to be useful rather than hanging around in limited hangouts, which I do believe is the way that they're now, the cattle are being taken into certain other pens, I suppose. And this is the way not to be one of those people that is being co-opted by the powers that be, because the worst thing you can do, folks, is to have the information that you need to speak the truth, and not to be in these limited hangouts or to be moving into other, this is what happened with 9/11. You can see the actual way that they do that. They're collection agencies, and they'll say, if you don't like door number 1, we'll give you door number 2. They understand that people will question the narrative, just like they did with JFK, and we're going to call them conspiracy theorists, and we're going to collect them over here and collect them over here. But the scary people are the ones who are relentlessly looking for the truth and looking for the facts that will help them to reveal people for what they are. And they're the ones that are often in the greatest danger too. I have to say, it's not a safe place to be in our world. You see the doctors who are trying to change the medical system, and suddenly they show up in rivers, and we just can't figure out what happened to them. But that, again, that's a whole different story. But these all intersect in such profound ways. So with that, I will.
Was it Orwell who said, "In a world of lies, telling the truth is a revolutionary act"?
I think it was. I think Orwell would be absolutely astounded at how we've given over, myself included. I have a cell phone, and we can use our VPNs or whatever we want to do, but we're only fooling ourselves if we think that we're not being monitored all the time. And I mean, we have to have a goal in mind, because I think that we can sort of get into these paradigms of right, wrong, and that sort of thing. My goal is to see people like you being able to play your music. I'm a musician. Wouldn't it be great if we could just have a world where we could pursue those kinds of creative ideas that we have and feel like we're enhancing the world rather than, I could see where Tesla was afraid that the technology that he created was going to be used for other than good purposes, and why some of these people were keeping them quiet, because they could see that in the wrong hands they can be used for absolute vile things. And there is reason to believe that technology was used on 9/11. There's ways in which your invention can be used for absolutely amazing purposes, jamming around the world, like that's what I look at it as in my naive way. I do a TV show where I feature musicians who are jamming, and I have this idea, if we could get it so that there was no, lag time, we could actually be doing a jam in real time and encouraging people who are young musicians and that sort of thing. Imagine the things that we could do with this kind of technology if it weren't being used for such nefarious purposes. So
exactly.
So that's my prayer, my wish, and thank you so much, Michael McKibben, for being so willing to share of your time and share the experiences. We only touched the tip of the iceberg, and I hope people will now be inspired to support you in your work and to see justice done. And not just for this case, but this is a seminal case that I think is indicative of our willingness to stand up for the right. All of us use this platform. All of us use this platform, and if we're using it, then we need to be honorable. We need to do as we would do to others. When we're thinking about Michael McKibben and his contribution to this world. So thank you so much, and we do have people in the chat that are thanking you as well.
You're welcome. It's great to talk with you, Joni.
Well, thanks, Michael, and I hope to talk to you again. And I will, at this point, say goodbye to my audience, and I'm going to end the stream here. And thank you very much for tuning in. And I hope that you share this information far and wide, folks. And do go to Americans for Innovation and get your information right from the horse's mouth. Thanks so much.